Our next guest here to weigh in on the protests in Iran and the possibility of U.S. involvement after President Trump said help is on the way. Joining us right now is Dan Senor. He is served as foreign policy advisor in the George W. Bush administration. He now hosts Call Me Back. It's a great podcast. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Good to see you.
So what do you think should happen here? If you were advising President Trump, do you think that there's an opportunity? We were talking to Amos Hochstein yesterday about whether we should be doing more and actually either some kind of military help or something else, and whether there's really opportunity for effectively regime change at this point.
The regime is the weakest it's ever been. What we've seen over the last couple of years is whenever there's been military action against Iran, whether from Israel or the United States, the regime has been in a weaker position. There have been a number of protests against the Iranian regime going back to 2009 with the Green Revolution after the quote-unquote election of Ahmadinejad in 2009. So there's 2009, there was 2018-19, there was 2022. We've had protest after protest after protest. None of them have been like this. They've only strengthened. The President of the United States has said he has the Iranian people's back, that he will not tolerate them being savage, brutally savage, and attacked the way they have been. And I think that if at this point there's no U.S. support in a kinetic sense for these protests, I think the regime has a chance of surviving. It still may fall, but I think U.S. military action will not only weaken the regime and the instruments of terror within the regime, but it'll also strengthen the morale of the Iranian people that are on the
What do you
streets.
make of the argument that it's just not ready to crack yet? That this is not a situation like Venezuela?
Yeah, well, you mean the protest movement is not fully, like, we have to wait for the protest movement to have even more energy and even more people?
That there's just too many other people behind this regime that would remain in power, that you wouldn't be able to topple it all in one shot.
I look, on October 7th, 2023, Hamas attacks Israel. Virtually no country in the world, no government in the world defends what Hamas does against Israel. Some criticize Israel as responsible for, quote-unquote, the root causes, but no government defends what Hamas did except for Iran. Since October 7th, Hamas is gone, Hezbollah is gone. This is basically Iran's proxy system in the region that Iran had invested hundreds of billions in dollars in developing. Iran's client state, the Assad regime in Syria, gone. Iran's nuclear program seriously weakened. I mean, this is a regime that, if you look at its 46, 47-year history, has never been on the edge the way it is now in terms of the external pressure it's under. Like, this whole proxy system is gone. There's no Hezbollah. There's no Iranian nuclear program. And then suddenly, internally, we've never seen levels of protest against the government like we have now. So I don't know what people are waiting. Like, what's the next thing that you're hoping for?
If you had to estimate public sentiment in Iran, I mean, the leadership still says that they've got plenty of people that are backing the current regime. Then I see it's 80% against the regime. But I don't know whether we know. Do we have an actual number?
It's very hard to know. Look,
because remember Iraq, it was going to be flowers in the street, and there were so many dead enders. It was almost half the country were dead enders, weren't they?
I could make the argument that Iranian inflation in Iran is off the charts, right? It's something like 50% as we understand it. For food, it's something closer to 70%. The economic conditions are unsustainable. That said,
not just ideologically, it's actually
very practical. Very practical, except the regime does have these security forces that they've been investing in, and those have staying power, which means you've got to hit the security forces. The security forces will have staying power.
They might be 20%.
This is not the Soviet Union in 1989 or 1990 or 1991. Because back then you had a Gorbachev, regardless of what one thinks of Gorbachev, who had already made the decision to bring reform to the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union was already starting to shrink in terms of its centralized power. There's nothing like that in Iran, which means if the supreme leader is committed to sticking around and strengthening the regime, they'll have some staying power, absent U.S. forces. With U.S. force, U.S. military projection of power, I think things could change.
What do you think we've been talking just even off camera, just about sort of what's happening in this country right now. And I'm curious how you think it relates actually to what's happening in this country, it relates to what we either do or don't do externally, which is to say, in a sort of America first world, I think there was a view, around a lot of Trump voters actually, that he was not going to be getting involved in wars, that he was not going to be getting involved outside of the borders. He was going to be focused squarely here, and therefore how much support he has or doesn't have for some of these efforts.
I think one of the fascinating things about Trump is what people project onto him as a political figure rather than what he actually represents. Trump has never been an isolationist. He has never saw a paradox between American power and America first, that you can use American power abroad, and that is actually in America first interest. I'm just, the way he talks about it, and you can go back to him taking out Soleimani in Iran in his first term. You can look at what he invested in the Abraham Accords, which obviously wasn't war.
Fordo was a weekend. Venezuela was a matter
surgical
of hours.
Targeted strikes. I think his lessons from the Bush and Obama administrations, in some respects you could argue he's taken the best lessons from the Bush and Obama administrations, which is not to hold back from using American military power. It's just to do it differently. In no situation that he has gotten involved in so far has he kind of gotten into what he would call one of these forever wars. He said we have tremendous capabilities. I mean, what the U.S. did in Venezuela was unbelievable. 150 aircraft, in and out, very targeted. It had a real end game. This is the objective. We want to get Maduro out. We're not going to leave troops on the ground. Same thing with the June attack against Iran. Let the IDF do and the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli intelligence forces do all the front end work, and we'll come in and finish things off, in and out. I think he has never seen a problem with that approach. And I think among the MAGA, quote unquote, the MAGA base, they don't have a problem with it either.
Yeah, because you're getting the MAGA back, and you're even getting the neocons back, which is awesome.
Trump could hold this coalition together.
Throw Greenland into the mix. What do you think?
I do not think there will be military action against Greenland. I think President Trump is forcing a discussion among European leaders. I'm surprised by the divide among some of the European leaders right now about whether or not the U.S. has a legitimate case that it's in the U.S. and the Western security interest to have some presence in Greenland or have some control of Greenland. But I do not think it's even worth having that conversation in the same conversation as whether or not the U.S. is going to unleash military power against Iran. It's just one is that it's regime change. One is regime change. One is an action of war. This is not what we're talking about.
I saw the Danish ambassador, and obviously the Danish ambassador was picked by the Trump administration, but she knows Denmark, and her reasoning was not that different than what you hear coming from. And I think even the individuals that were on last night from Denmark, they do concede a lot of the things that Trump, the end game is something they agree with. They can't really provide the security. They don't have the money to provide the security that might be needed to keep Russia and China out of Greenland. It's becoming more and more important.
I would just say, between what's happening in the Western Hemisphere and what's been happening in the Middle East, I know there are a lot of people very critical of President Trump, but if you just took a step back, remove him from the storyline, what is being accomplished right now in multiple theaters around the world is like historic. And
to try to separate out what's happening here, and I was going to tell you, new highs in the stock market, 5% GDP, low unemployment, trade deals around the world. The southern border is closed. Wages are rising. So I'm looking for the part of that story you told us where the culture wars, we're always going to argue about that. Now, maybe people think that Trump's going to leave the world in a worse position in terms of culture wars here in the U.S., but there's plenty of people that like the side of the culture wars where Trump is at this point.
I will say the following. The lives that will be changed if the regime falls in Iran is extraordinary. You're talking about tens of millions of people's lives that we not only think they want to change, they're on the streets and they are risking their lives every day for that change.
Right.
And to your point about the culture wars, you go around American college campuses right now, crickets.
Like for Iran.
Suddenly there's no concern about the brutal human rights violations of this most brutal human rights violating regime. And the opportunity for it to be toppled. Whose side are people on?
My Twitter feed is self-selecting, obviously, but someone today said, George Bailey, think of how many lives could have been, if Trump had never been born, that's the point you're making right now. How many lives we're talking about that would have been changed in the Middle East or, take your pick.
First of all, I don't think you would have had an end to the October 7th war. I don't think this fall we would have gotten all those hostages back, even though there's still one there. And the windup of the war.